بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. Greetings and peace, loved ones worldwide. I pray everyone is in a blessed state and everything is going well with you and yours. We are in the holy month of Ramadan, the month of fasting, the month of increased worship, increased contemplation, increased supplication, and increased intimacy with the revelation. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. I pray it's a time for openings and for deepenings and for great blessings for you and yours, inshallah. This episode is with a dear friend, Amir Sulaiman. Amir is a poet. Amir is a screenwriter. Amir is an emcee. Amir is a beautiful human being and a deep brother to engage in conversation. And I've been honored in my life to engage in many a deep conversation with him. And so, alhamdulillah, we finally got to record one of those and share it with you. In this conversation, as you see, we talk about narrative and story and its relation to the spiritual path. Alhamdulillah, it's the month of Ramadan, and so if you want to support this podcast, we'd be very, very grateful. You can do so on patreon.com/pathandpresent. You can support with anything as little as $1 a month goes a great way. Alhamdulillah. Also, your du'as and sharing with your people is great and is very beneficial as well. Also, I wanted to mention, alhamdulillah, I'm in the Seattle area for the next few months. I'm doing a bunch of programs with Wasat. Wasat is a great community organization in Seattle. Every Wednesday, we're doing a course called Knowledge of Self, and we're talking about the great sages and great spiritual masters, such as Imam al-Ghazali, Maulana Rumi, Imam al-Haddad, Abdul Qadir Jilani, and all of the great awliya and salihin, and the ways to understand the self, what the human being is, and to transform the self. If you're in the Seattle area, come and break bread with us, break fast with us, and if not, check out Wasat's Facebook, WASAT, Wasat, and they'll have live stream all those events as well. Alhamdulillah. And then also for Rumi Center for Spirituality and the Arts, we're doing something called Ramadan Ruminations, where we're encouraging people to write poetry, poetic reflections, and really just document their internal journey on this blessed month. So we hope you'll join us for this month and do that with us, inshallah. You can check that out at Rumi Center for Spirituality and the Arts on Facebook or at Rumi Center Arts on Instagram. If you just check out the hashtag Ramadan Ruminations on Facebook or Instagram, you'll see all the beautiful things that people are writing and sharing, inshallah. Alhamdulillah. Without further ado, enjoy Amir Sulaiman. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I've been reflecting on deeply is that all art is a kind of mode of narrative. Right. Like there's narrative, there's story, and then that's the great well, and then everything else is a stream. Every art form is a method of conveying a story, whether you're painting a picture, whether obviously you're telling a movie, or whether you're writing a poem, or whether you're writing a short story or an epic narrative, a song. It's all story based. And even the deepest thing is if you study like calligraphy, or you study architecture, or you study geometric patterns, that even if you don't know, the truth is there's a story in it, right? It's all symbolically representing things tied to a greater narrative. And I actually think a lot about that because I remember when I became Muslim, and I think my art really developed a lot and grew. And even like the people that I grew up with making songs and making music were like, 6 months later they were like, dude, you took off. And I see it as because I obviously I had like a internal inspiration, but I think also I stepped into a universe of symbolic meaning. And so I had all this greater narrative, this greater story that I could draw on. You know what I mean? And in a sense, like all the great storytellers, they're drawing on, like we're all in a collective story too. That's what's deep about like being a Muslim or being a Christian or being a Buddhist or you're part of a collective narrative. And so, and that's deep. Even the Quran itself is part of a broader narrative, which is that of the, Arabia 7th century, because in the Quran, very few stories are told from beginning to end. Instead, the vast majority of stories are referenced. Like, remember when we said to Moses, remember when Abraham said to Nimrod, and what's deep is like, it's just how we would talk if I was like, you remember when we were in Oakland at the burrito spot and what's it called? Like, I'm not going to tell the whole story because So
it's like making a Darth Vader reference. Like, like I'd be like, like Darth Vader. Everyone has a picture of what that means. Someone who was from the light and then went to the dark side. But, however I'm using that. If I say Judas, everyone understands what that means, because don't be like Judas. I don't have to go through the whole story of Judas. Even people who aren't Christian or aren't religious or aren't studied. I can speak for myself. I don't know if I've deliberately read the story of Judas. But if someone says Judas, I know what they mean. They mean a traitor. You know what I'm saying? Because it's a narrative. And Allah is speaking, calling it a narrative. Like particularly when he relates about Yusuf alayhi salam, he's almost boasting about being a great storyteller. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm going to demonstrate this beautiful story to you, And then the Quran itself, not just in the Arabian Peninsula, that narrative, which it is, but it's also in this isn't the origin story. You know what I'm saying? Like, we have the Torah, we have the Injil. This is the stories of the prophets that came before you, the people of Thamud, the people of Ad, the people of Pharaoh, the people of so on and so forth. And so it's reinforcing the heart. Allah is reinforcing the heart of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam by saying, and this is how we use story now, even in conversation, like you said, if you say something like, don't be a Judas, or if you say something like, don't be the boy who cried wolf, or you say something like whatever it is, you're referencing that story. Or if you're reinforcing someone, it's like, oh, you're like King Arthur, or you're like, this is like the sword of Camelot, or this is like the ring of power, or this is like this is like the Infinity Stones, whatever it may be. But Allah is reinforcing the heart of the Prophet by referencing, this is what happened to the people that came with what you're coming with before. So when they say this to you, know that people have said that. When they say that to you, when they do this to you, when they do that to you, it's like, oh, I'm in a story. I'm in a narrative, a story that God is telling. You know what I'm saying? And that's what I mean. Every day I think about story, it becomes more profound and more meaningful. That not only for humans, but it is a divine method by which the God describes what God created. It is literally, it's beyond imagination. It expands beyond what I can imagine. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think that's a good point that you close with, is like, even the modern story of imagination is kind of like, it's unreal, right? That's just imagination. And we say like, that's just myth. But I think for traditional peoples, they had an understanding that the physical world is in a sense like the lowest world, and it's in a sense the least real world. Right. And there's actually, and that's why like Ibn Arabi talks, and that whole like kind of philosophical Sufism, they talk about alam al-khayal, that there's an imaginal realm that's actually more real. So there's a spiritual realm, then there's a barzakh, which is the imaginal realm, and then there's the physical realm. Right. So the imaginal realm is where like the spiritual realities pass to come into physical reality.
Right. That's the latter form. The densest.
So like there's, and like Plato, the Greek philosophical tradition, has a similar thing because there's archetypes, right? So there's like physical manifestations of, there's horses, but then there's like an archetypal horse.
Horse, right.
Categories, and we can understand symbolic meaning in things. And so it's almost like, stories are operating on this higher plane because, right. And that's the deepest thing, because for children, for instance, they don't want to hear like abstract theory. They want to see stories. Like, tell us a story. Yeah.
And this is like the, two things on that point. I'm trying to get better light on me, but now I look kind of creepy. I don't know. Now it looks like story time. Okay, children, gather. Okay, children, gather around. Let me tell you a story. I'm trying to use my flashlight. I think I made that up. But I remember I was with one of an agreed upon saintly person, and we were in a house, and we were leaving the house. I won't disclose who the person is, but it's a person of knowledge and a person of, mashallah, great spiritual insight. So we're leaving the house, and there were children in the house, and they're watching a cartoon. And one of the students asked this master, how much of this is real and how much of it is fake? And he said, none of the things that you see in any of those cartoons or movies, none of them are fake. They haven't made up anything. All of this, whether they know it or not, is referencing something Allah already created. And once you think about it, you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That the imagination is only drinking, from the great well, like you said, of the Barzakh, which is coming from the spiritual realms, which is coming from the creation of Allah Ta'ala. And so, so he was like, Star Wars, anything you see on Lord of the Rings, any of that is real. And when we use the word real, quote unquote, we have to understand what that is, because most people, like you said, in modernity, particularly under the influence of Western modern thought, is that what is most real is matter. And then whatever comes from matter by its proximity to matter becomes less and less real, just a matter-centric worldview. But like you said, most traditional societies around the world is exactly the opposite. And so so that's one thing. And then the other thing is like, particularly in the Islamic tradition, not particularly, actually, it's not particular to the Islamic tradition. That's just my reference point for it. But there's references for this in, I think, all traditional societies, where there wasn't, except in a scholastic class, like they would talk about a virtue, and then they would list the benefits of this virtue with the proofs from the holy books or from the ancient scribes or whatever. Like, this is gratitude. This is ingratitude. The virtues of gratitude are A, B, C, X, Y, Z. The proofs that this is a virtue is the ancient so-and-so said, or God said in his book, or whatever, and there's a list. That's for academic people. But the way people learn that is through a story. This is the story of the king who lost everything, but he was grateful, and then such and such. Or this is the story of a poor man who got wealth, and he was ungrateful and became haughty, and then this is what happened. And that's how people learned about virtue. Likewise, same in the modern age, we learn about virtue from Luke Skywalker, from John Wayne, from Tom Cruise. Like, we learn what it is to be a hero, what it is to be good, what it is to be noble, what it is to the virtue of sacrifice, the virtue of love, the virtue of courage, the virtue of truthfulness, and so on. We're trained in this by way of story. And so for, when I think about Muslim people in particular, to leave off the affair of story is to leave off, what they call soft power. Like, this is like a great power to affect, to change, to influence, to benefit narrative, meaning the narrative of just our age is a great, great power. It's a great power. And I don't think we realize how much of our clamoring around politics or clamoring around, other things where we're seeking for power, even military. In my opinion, and this is arguable, of course, but there's no power greater than narrative. Narrative can stop war. Narrative does stop and start war. If they're going to have a war, we're going to make peace today. If they're going to start war or they're going to make peace, people sit in a room and figure out what's the narrative. And then they feed that to the media, or they feed that to the people through the press conferences. It's not haphazard. People decide this is the story. Iraq needs to be liberated. Saddam Hussein is a terrorist. It's about women and women's freedom, and these women have to wear burqas, so we should fight and bomb their country to liberate them so they can wear skirts. And whatever it is, they have to cook up this narrative. So it literally starts and stops war. There is not a war except that there's a narrative that supports it, that holds it, that frames it. You know, it's powerful. It's powerful.
Yeah, and it's deep too, because in a sense, war, or when like tribes or civilizations or nations meet, they're meeting as like competing narratives, essentially. Right. Like if you think of, you know, the cowboys and the Indians, like they are living in totally different narratives of what existence even is. And so that is clashing. It's not just physical. And then also, I mean, the one that comes to mind as a, you know, profound example of this is Israel-Palestine. Like these are peoples with competing narratives about the physical soil. And so, and those two narratives, they can't be reconciled. So one of them has to give, or we just keep fighting forever until one is superior, because they're totally different narratives about who we are as a people and what this land is and who it belongs to.
No.
And yeah, wow.
No, it's deep, and it's just a means, you know, outside or deeper than just, you know, in its political form, but it's a means of, and I haven't quite gotten to the bottom of this. Why is it so effective as a means of spiritual instruction? What is it about narrative as opposed to listing, or as opposed to like teaching in the way that we use teaching now, the word teaching now? What is it about narrative and giving? I guess it's to give the virtues a form, you know? So it's not gratitude. It's not courage. It's Luke Skywalker, you know what I'm saying? Or it's not wisdom. It's Yoda. Or it's not, you know what I mean? So I can identify with Yoda. I can't see wisdom. I can't imagine wisdom. You know what I'm saying? Maybe that's what it is. But it as a tool, I mean, going from the Kemetic societies all the way up to today, without intermission, even in the modern age, I mean, we live in the greatest age of storytelling ever. The history of the human being story has developed in a way, like we say, binge watching, that's even a term in English. That term wasn't a term 10 years ago. You know what I'm saying? Except for a person who has like a psychological disorder. You know, like if someone sat in their house, if someone sat in their house 20 years ago and was watching one show for 10 hours, bro, that would be something you would see on Ricky Lake, you know, about this person, how he lost his wife and his job. And, you know, like it's unheard of. But for people, actually with the exception of soap operas, I think soap opera is the only exception of this style of narrative that's been, we are kind of watching the same story. It's the same characters, the same thing, and it just goes on and on and on for years. But the rate at which and the amount of narrative that we consume, even epic poems like the Odyssey, Beowulf, no one sat like that to hear a story like Breaking Bad and 5 or 6 seasons, an hour each, 10 episodes a season, where I, Amir, have committed some 60 hours of my life, you know what I'm saying? To that one narrative, following the story of this one guy, you know what I'm saying? Of Walter White. I'm invested in this character. And what happens to him and watching him grow and change is teaching me something about myself, whether I like it or not, whether I know it or not, whether I acknowledge it or not. But it's reinforcing or challenging what I understand what it means to be human. You know what I mean? And that's something profound.
Yeah. Okay. So we're raising some really interesting things. And you asked that question, like, what is really happening on the deeper level? Because, and one thing to look at that I was thinking about is every product that is sold using narrative as well. That's what a commercial is, or an advertisement. Even if it's just a picture of some woman wearing some clothes and you're trying to sell whatever Nikes or anything like that, there's a narrative attached to how she looks, to what she's doing, to her physical movement, to all that stuff.
Yeah, what her hair looks like, what color her skin is she in the countryside or is she in the city, is she at home, inside out? All those are decisions that are made by people to reinforce a narrative about that product.
And they work. Like it is undoubted that these, like, take a commercial on television. In fact, television itself is an ad for the commercials, because what is selling television is the commercial. That is why that is on TV, is because there's people that, advertisers spend all this money to have your eyeballs. So the more successful the television show, that means the more eyeballs get on it. That means the more budget they have for the show, then it's a successful show. It's all about selling us something. And the deeper thing is, we know when a commercial comes on, all right, there's a whole multi-million-dollar campaign with very strategic marketing to affect what I want and to get my money. And yet it still works. I think, if it's a truck or it's everything is sold using, using desires, essentially. What we desire to be, who we desire to be with, what kind of people, what kind of story we want to have for ourselves, right? You want to wear that watch because that narrates a story about who you are to other people and to yourself, right? So all of this stuff is going on this deeper level. And I mean, there's so much about that. But one thing that they talk about in this book, Cyrus Ali Zargar, which I was telling you about this book, and I just did a podcast with him. He mentions, I think it's in the chapter on Ibn Sina, because some of the there's like ikhtilaf amongst the Muslim philosophers on if storytelling was a high art or if it was lower than like just pure rational discourse. Because and you even find this in Imam al-Ghazali, even though he uses a lot of stories, often he'll say like a very abstract, like theoretical, this is what's going on. And then he'll say, for those that are more dim-witted, I'm going to tell a story. Like he really just puts it on some, like, for those that need, but there was a difference of opinion, because others were like, no, story is actually higher because we have two faculties. We have the rational, logical faculty, but we also have this imaginative faculty, which is really important. And so if you're just engaging the rational, logical, that's one. If you're just telling a story that has no meaning, essentially beyond the story, that's imagination. But if you're telling truth, telling an allegory, a symbolic narrative which conveys a deeper truth, then you're essentially activating them both at once.
And I think that's why it's more enthralling. Yes. That's why I think I'll go sit in a 2-hour movie, but if the khutbah is 2 hours, I'm like, what the hell is this guy doing? I got to get out of here. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. But I'll sit, like I said, how many hours? So binge watch 3 episodes, and that's light work, bro. If I watch 3 episodes of something, that's still light work. You know what I'm saying? 3 hours, if I had to sit in a 3-hour talk about the virtues, or even whatever the concepts are that are being talked about in the show, if I had to sit in a 3-hour thing about crime, or about methamphetamines, or about, the virtue of not loving the world, you know what I'm saying? I'd get tired, you know what I mean? But I could ride with Walter White, no problem. Now I have to discipline myself to stop after the 3rd episode so I could go and do something productive with my life. But I was of the opinion, likewise, that story was a lower form. Not until I've been a poet, professionally for, 15, almost 20 years or something like that. So, I've been engaging storytelling in a way. Not until I started writing film, just a couple years ago, did I just really deepen my level of respect for narrative. And it really lit up my mind and lit up my heart and lit up my spirit with what happens when consuming a story, because now I'm behind, it's like a chef, like you eat something like, oh my God, this is delicious. But then you learn, it's because this citrus and this fat and this savory and like at this, you're behind the scene, and I know when it hits your tongue, the sensation that you have, I know what it is because I designed it. It's not happens. And so as an avid movie watcher, ever since a kid, it was my favorite pastime. You know what I'm saying? Even when other people would want to like go and party and go to other things, I would really like to watch movies. I'm still like that to this day. And so consumed a lot of movies. But man, sitting down and writing one, sheesh, it opened up my mind to a whole another level of respect for the form. Just that it's difficulty, but then also what's happening, like what I'm doing to the audience, and understand what's been done to me so many times. It's like, wow, this is deep. This is a deep spiritual technology. It's a deep spiritual technology, man, that I'm just thoroughly amazed by. You know what I mean? Amazed.
I want to hear more about that because that's deep. And, one thing that's deep about it is that when you see a movie, or even when you read like Shakespeare, or you read Rumi, or you read an epic narrative, or even a lesser one, what's deep about it is that all of those characters who are developed and who have lives and who have backstories and who have identities, and especially if it's a kind of allegorical piece, like the great art always is. Shakespeare, for instance, always has characters representing flaws in character or virtues or perspectives or, you know what I mean, philosophical approaches to life.
Right.
But what's deep is all of those people who we come to love or come to hate or make us laugh or make us cry, etc., or come to identify with, if we want to say, I'm Luke Skywalker, right? Or I'm Morpheus, or I'm, you know what I mean? Whatever.
Right.
All those characters exist in someone's imagination, in one person. So all the characters in Shakespeare, he's a good example, right? They're all in whoever wrote that. They're all in it. They don't actually exist outside of him.
Right. No, and that's what was amazing in me writing, because in any good piece, and in a lot of these pieces that we might think are trash, like some Transformer movie or some romantic comedy that we think of as like low cinema, right? And it is like a lower form of cinema art. But even in the standard text of screenwriting, even whatever was required to write Pootie Tang or whatever.
Hey, why did Louis C.K. write that though?
Right, exactly. It's crazy. I remember when I read two things about him. I remember when I realized that he wrote that was a mind-blowing thing, and that he's Mexican. Was a mind-blowing discovery. I was like, you're Mexican, bro? Yeah, so anyway, so, even something like that, in the standard, most basic, lowest form of cinema, when you read any of the books about screenplay, because that's where I was starting from, from scratch. And that's what they say. Each character means something. They're not an actual person. If you write them as an actual person, you'll miswrite them. They have to mean something. They have to have, each character has a narrative about the world, Magneto has a narrative about the world that contradicts Professor Xavier's narrative about the world. Now, the writer is preferring one of those narratives to the other, and that's why one is the protagonist and one is the antagonist. But in order to manifest the antagonist, to manifest the protagonist's virtue, it needs to be challenged or contrasted with a rival, opposite, or alternative view, and a type of view that can't coexist at the same time. So there can't be two views that could just like come together and live in harmony, because there's no drama, there's no conflict, and that's what storytelling is about. Difficulty, drama, conflict. So from Shakespeare all the way down to Pootie Tang, you know what I'm saying? There is that thing that each character is about, and it's coming out of one person. So then I have these characters inside me. I'm writing this film called Wake, right? So I have this character named Yusuf. I have this character named Diana. I have this character named Susu. I have this character named, and I have to develop inside of myself, because not only the way they think, the way they talk, their cadence, the types of things that they would say in any given situation, I have to become intimately familiar with these people, but they're all me, And so, but this is one of the first and most profound discoveries I had, which is very personal. So I'm writing this story, right? The main character is Yusuf. I love Yusuf. He is the reason that I created the story. You know what I'm saying? Everything revolves around Yusuf, right? And I want to manifest his heroic characteristics, some good or virtue in him. So what do? I put him in hardship after hardship after hardship after hardship. Because if I'm going to show his courage, I have to create danger. I, as the creator of this world, have to create danger so that I can demonstrate how courageous he is. You know what I mean? I have to demonstrate hardship to show his determination to get what he wants. If you didn't know better, you would think I hated him. But it reminds me of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying that when Allah loves you, He tests you, and Allah talking about who gets the most severe test, the prophets, and after them the saints, and so on and so on, right? And it's like, I get it, because we can't know Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We can't know Jesus, the son of Mary, alayhi salam. We can't know them except that they demonstrate their prophetic virtues. And that can only be in the presence of what is in confrontation to those prophetic virtues. So Musa alayhi salam needs a Fir'aun, or else we would never know who Musa was. We would never know who he was. We would never know if he had courage or not. We would never know if he would speak truth to power or whatever. You know what I'm saying? If it were not for Fir'aun. So he needed Pharaoh to manifest himself. Ibrahim alayhi salam, Abraham needed Nimrod, Every prophet has a Magneto, you know what I'm saying? Every Professor Xavier has a Magneto. Every Luke Skywalker has a Darth Vader. And so every Imam Mahdi has a Dajjal. So I was realizing as I'm and sometimes, like I would put him through a hardship, but it wasn't like hard enough. It wasn't painful enough. So then I would put something in his backstory. Like, say, for example, I put something in the story that's hard. His wife does something that's very hurtful to him. And I'm making his wife do it, and I'm making his wife hurt him, right? But I claim to love him. I hurt him, but I feel like it didn't hurt enough. So then I put in his backstory a mother who died that references what his wife did or said. So this would even hurt worse. So I go in his past and create something that will make the pain even more severe. And I was like, you would think I hated him. You would think I hated him. And so it makes me think of times that I or other people would say, why me? Oh God, why? You know what I mean? But when I understand my life as narrative, then, and this is what the saints say, this is what the Sufis say, that hardship becomes pleasure. You know what I'm saying? Oh, this is the part of the movie, this is the part of my story when I overcome poverty or I overcome danger. This is a time for me to show off my heroic characteristics. I remember watching Joe Rogan's podcast, and he mentioned one of the best advice that he ever got. He was like, view yourself as the hero in your own movie. You know what I'm saying? And you're at the part of the movie when you're a loser. But you know how the movie ends, right? You're jacked up, whatever. And this is the part of the movie when you start to make the change. This is when you become the hero. This is when you go from Peter Parker to Spider-Man. This is when you come from, you know what I'm saying, Luke, the orphan, to Luke, the Jedi. This is when you become and Mr. Anderson, the computer hacker, to Neo. You know, we're gonna watch yourself and view yourself as that and do the thing. So then the hardship that comes, it's almost eternal. It's like, like once Neo was surrounded by 100,000 Mr. Smiths, that's exciting. You're excited about that part. You love Neo though, but you're excited about that part because now I'm really gonna see Neo show off what he's learned. You know what I'm saying? Now this is an adequate environment and confrontation where he can demonstrate how much of a hero he really is. And then we have the epic battle sequences and so on, whatever movie in Lord of the Rings or Star Wars or Star Trek, whatever it is. And we see that. And I said, man, this is teaching me so much about my life, because I'm basically, I mean, you know, no Sherlock, but you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm a creator of a little world, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm the governor of this little world. And I create these nafus, I create ego selves that have strengths and weaknesses, preferences and dislikes and so on. And I put them in context, and I create the whole world to force them to engage with each other, such that I can demonstrate what I, Amir, want to say. I want to say something about virtue. I want to say something about courage. So I create all these nafus, all of these nafs, all of these egos. I create them. I create an environment. I create a circumstance. I create need. I create love. I create hate. I create desires, envies. So I can demonstrate something about what I want to say about what I created. You know, I said, mashallah, that's amazing. It's an amazing experience, you know? It's amazing.
Yeah, there's so much there. And I think one of the interesting pieces, right, is like we all have our exemplars, right? We all have those people who we're actually modeling ourselves after, protagonists, you know what I mean? And everyone has one. That's the thing. Even, you know, people that are saying like, I'm a rebel, so I'm against who society says should be my, you know, exemplar. They take an exemplar that is a rebel, right? You know what I mean? That is. And this is deep, because it's almost like we need that. And it kind of gets back to this conversation of like why story. In a sense, I think on some level we need like an embodiment. We need an embodiment of principles, right? Like you say, to talk about courage theoretically in abstract form, it's like, in a sense, it's not as effective as just telling a very short story about somebody who embodies courage. You know what I mean? And, you know, what you said is deep about like writing in difficulty, because even in like a love story, right? If you tell a love story and the story is just so-and-so loves so-and-so, so she loves him back, and they get together. That's a terrible story. It's a terrible.
People would say it's not even a story.
Right, exactly.
It's not a story until there's conflict, and conflict is overcome or engaged in some way. You have people would say, when does the story start? You know, is it about them getting divorced later? You know, like, where does the story start? It's no story. Yeah,
that's deep. That's deep. And that's deep. And actually, stories, like if you were to hit me up and be like, yo, man, this happened, and you know, you say like, for instance, I went on safari, and like this lion was circling our Jeep, and I'm like, wait, then what happens? And then if you're like, yeah, but then he went away, it was cool, I'd be like, oh, that wasn't that good of a story. Like I was waiting for him, like he starts jumping on your truck, and everybody has to run, and you got to climb a tree. Then it's a good story.
And even in that context, like even with, so say for example, if I call you and I say, yo, Blue, I met this girl, she's crazy. Beautiful, she's cool, she's smart, everything. I got a number, we've been talking, she likes me too, we're together now. Even that by itself, that's not a great story, except if you know the story of my life. Like, why am I saying so? Even though that particular story is not interesting because there's no conflict, but if you know how hard is that to come by, just in a general sense, and you're like, oh wow, that's crazy, because the odds that are against you to accomplish what you just told me in a longer narrative, even if it's not this narrative that I'm telling you right now, you know what I'm saying? It's like, you know, if I say, yo, I won a lottery, that's exciting. Because, dude, you've been poor since I know you. So it's like, this is the part of a longer story where this part happens against insurmountable odds. Somehow you know, if I say, you know, Cornerstone Folklore, yo, we got picked up for 3 seasons in such and such joint, that's just good news. There's no conflict there. But because that's not really the whole story. So it's like, so even all the time, we're kind of always processing everything in a context of a story. You know what I'm saying? So if I call you and tell you this about this girl, you're like, oh, this is Amir. but you think about Amir, or you think about just relationships in the modern age and how hard it is, or whatever the narrative is, but you're going to put it inside of a narrative, and that's going to determine how excited you are about it. Like, yo, if your narrative has been like, yo, ain't no those type of women in the world or whatever, or Amir's never gonna, or it's too hard in modernity to have whatever the narrative is. What that information, you're still gonna plug it into your narrative. You know what I'm saying? And then that's what's gonna determine the meaning of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think relating this to metaphysics and like the Sufi perspective on this affair of existence, I think then it takes on some, and I think this is the undercurrent to this whole conversation, because the profound teaching that Allah said, I was a hidden treasure that loved to be known, so I created. And Ibn Arabi states very clearly that actually, Ibn Arabi says something amazing. He says, the reason you dream, the reason human beings dream, is to have this is a gift from Allah to understand what existence is vis-a-vis God. Mm-hmm. That in other words, we're in a divine dream. We're in a divine imagination. Mm-hmm. And the implications of I was a hidden treasure that loved to be known, so I created, is that before anything, there was unity, oneness, the supreme, the source, the creator, Allah. And you can't say that there's any deficiency in Allah. However, when there's one, what there isn't is duality. Right. So if there's anything that quote unquote lacks, because Allah doesn't lack anything, it's that there's no, there's no second. There's no limitation in a sense. And so that this whole affair is beings created with such that the Allah gets to be known, right, and loved, and in a sense gets to, and here's where alhamdulillah, poetic license, gets to experience through each experiencer. Right. You see what I'm saying? Because that's the thing about when you watch a movie, of course, there's like the protagonist, the main individual. But if the writer is good, they'll develop the other characters too. So you'll see, you may not agree with them, or you may see he's a bad guy, but you also see how he got like that. And you understand, you start to empathize at least a little bit. And then you start to see through his perspective. Even if you see, he doesn't have the full perspective, he's on the wrong path, but you still see why he sees it.
One of the greatest characters written, I think, ever on this is something that just happened last year. Is Killmonger is an excellent example of that type of character where, okay, you're the villain, but you're the writer, I'm forgetting his name right now, Coogler, what he did with him is he developed him so richly. Like, he gave him such development. You understand totally everything he's saying. You may not agree with everything, but it is sound. Like, you like, I get it. Yeah. So you want to kill all these people and their families and their children? I don't want to kill their children, but yeah, I get it. You know what I'm saying? But, what you said made me think of two things. One from Sheikh Maïsisi, my sheikh, and then one from his sheikh. So Sheikh Maïsisi says about poetry, he said it's like dreaming while you're awake, to reference that Ibn Arabi piece, It's and I would include also, this is what it was like writing a screenplay. Because I'm dreaming, like I'm making characters, I'm making their forms, where they come from, why they're there, what they want, what they're doing. I'm like, and this is why it's so hard, because it's like trying to pull that state of being while you're awake and like typing, you know what I'm saying? While you're actually engaged in this material universe, you're creating another universe and you're trying to like distill that universe down into actual B-O-L period, such and such, like into symbols of this world, you know what I'm saying? That's one. And two is Sheikh Ibrahim Inyas, who only died in 1975. May Allah be pleased with him. So they're dealing with different technological advances. So some people are writing them like, is the radio halal or haram? You know what I'm saying? Is television and cinema halal or haram? You know what I mean? So he's having to answer questions about this type of stuff. It's like the internet. People are all like, "This is the assignment of the job." All of this type of stuff, right? So he says about cinema, about movies. He said that he would like each of his murids, each of his talibés, each of his students to go to the cinema at least once, because then you can experience what it's like to see something that is real and unreal at the same time. You know what I'm saying? That you're having a very real experience, but it's not real, but it is real, but it's not. For example, and this deals with time as well. So, say, you're sitting and you're watching, Lord of the Rings. And I say, did Gandalf the Grey become Gandalf the White yet? That's what I say, right? So maybe that part hasn't happened yet in the story. But I've seen the movie several times, and you've seen the movie several times. So you can say, no, it hasn't happened, and that's true. But we've seen the movie already. So yes, it has happened. We've watched that happen over and over again. Free, if you took the DVD out or the USB drive or however you're viewing it, that moment is always existing there. Say if it's to make it easy, say if it's on a DVD. The point on the DVD where that moment's happened, it's always happening. So it's always happening. And then it's not even real. So it never happened. There is no Gandalf, and he never becomes Gandalf the White. So it is true in that moment that it has not happened. It's already happened. It's always happening, and it never happened. And this is something that we understand about matter once we get into even what science is coming to agree upon as far as the nature of time. But we're doing that with story very naturally, you know what I'm saying? And by looking at story as a high form, like if we looked at it with the seriousness that we look at spirituality and sacred text and things like that, if we looked at it with the seriousness of that, we would uncover a great deal of, like what you said, of divine experience by, like, I'm realizing, I'm creating a world. Like, this is a nafs, and I made it. I just made this ego self. You know what I'm saying? And these other ego selves, and I made time. Such I'm bouncing back and forth in time. I'm looking at time like this, like a thing. You know what I'm saying? And I can go wherever in time I want to go. And cinema explores this to a great deal, more than even other art forms, other storytelling art forms. So the flashback is a commonly used tool. The flash forward is a commonly used tool. You know, if you're watching a Tarantino film, or you're watching a who does this a lot? Who's the director and the writer? Oh, Nolan, Christopher Nolan. You know what I mean? When he does Inception or Dunkirk or what's another movie that I can't remember? But anyway, he does very strange things with time, you know, so I can engage in the past, future, present. It's all available to me, you know what I mean? And when we think about what the reality of time is, like you said, from the view of God, you know, that, yeah, God is not moving through time. He's outside of time, engaging it as he would like, you know? So all of these things came rushing into my consciousness, rushing into my understanding, just by trying to write a movie. It's really much. I've been writing poetry writing poetry for a long time, but like as a profession for 20 years. I thought that this was, in my opinion, maybe it was just me being pretentious, but I was like, poetry is the highest form of writing. Like, this is as far as language can go. You know what I'm saying? But I had the deepest spiritual opening writing this movie than I have any other thing. It has been the most profound spiritual experience that I've had in my life, you know, in creating something.
MashaAllah.
Yeah, mashallah.
Yeah, and subhanAllah, I mean, all those characters are inside of you. And I think, you know, what's interesting is like the world's wisdom, sacred traditions are unanimous in that if you get to like the mystical essence, it's that the only thing that is separating each one of us from the ultimate reality is this thin veil of self, of perceiving oneself.
Mm-hmm.
And unanimously, there's a teaching that people can get at least glimpses of beyond the veil, that they can remove themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And what's really deep about that is that, and this is the idea of the hidden treasure that love to be known, and like qalb al-mu'min arsh ar-rahman, that the heart of the believer is the throne of the all-merciful.
Mm-hmm.
And the fana fillah, this annihilation in the divine reality, is that in a sense every character even the subjectivity of the character, there's something extremely mysterious happening in every single individual. And also, if we go to the fact that another thing the traditions are unanimous about is that everything we do in this play of existence, this movie of life on earth, that we are held accountable for it. We've talked about this before, whether it's the Abrahamic tradition speaking of a day of rising, a day of accountability, a day of judgment, or whether it's the Dharmic tradition speaking about a wheel of reincarnation. Those may seem hard to reconcile on the surface, but what they share is that whatever you do, whether it's of benefit or of harm to others, etc., you will reap its repercussions in the next realm. Yeah. And of course, that will define what story you are placed into. You know what I mean? Like that will, and they're unanimous about that, which is interesting. But I'm really interested in this point that like the one, and you have this in all traditions, is that there, in the Sufi tradition, this idea that there was only God and nothing else existed, and God is as he always was. That in the highest estimation, nothing exists but God. Even though we may be in this movie and we're totally like enthralled with it. I mean, the whole point is like, of the sacred scriptures and of the prophets is like, they're reminders that like, this is a movie and you're going to wake up for it and you're going to see what it's all about. It's not what it looks like. It's all symbols. You get to choose what character you play.
Exactly. It's virtual reality. It's not reality. It's something that's kind of resembling reality. It's virtually real. You know what I'm saying? And that's what I'm saying. And that's the amazing part, because at the end of the day, Yusuf, Mimi, Susu, all of these characters, it's just me. Before the movie was written, I am how I was. You know what I'm saying? I am as I was. So these characters did not add on to me. They can't harm me. They can't, if they're very grateful, it doesn't give me anything. If they're ungrateful, it doesn't take anything away from me. I could give every one of them everything that they ever wanted, and it wouldn't decrease for me at all. I could refuse every one of their pleas, and I don't care. Like, sometimes when people engage in sacred tests and they hear God speaking from his majesty, they want to like engage with God, like God has to be fair with us or something. Like, that's not fair. Why would God say like, he's God? Like, you're not. And this was part of the problem with making God a person. You know what I'm saying? I'm Amir, that's Yusuf. I have a name, he has a name. I have desires, he has desires. We're not the same. He can't do me anything. He can't do me anything. He can't harm me at all. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, I could give him everything he ever wanted, like this, one in succession, one after the other. But that's not the story I want to tell. I want to give this servant this and that servant that. And I want to take this away from that character and give it to this character because I want to do it. And you don't have any recourse. You can't judge me. These characters that I made, they can't judge me. You can't, you know what I'm saying? It's like, it's not like you can't, meaning I'm too high in my, it's not even a point of pride. I'm saying you're literally not on my level. You know what I'm saying? Like, you have no power. There is no power and might in your world except me. You know what I'm saying? It's like, that's it, you know? And so it removes some of our sense of entitlement with God. That's what I'm trying to get to. There's a sense of entitlement with God. You know what I'm saying? But if you understand this is a narrative, you can understand a relationship between yourself and the dream. I like yourself in a story even better because a story is deliberate. Like a dream is kind of, you might be in control, you might not be, you're sort of, you're kind of, but when you write a story, again, dreaming while you're awake, you're making decisions about each of these creations. You know what I'm saying? And you're doing things to them purposely for a reason. You know what I mean? And once I engage that, and I'm like, yeah, these characters, I give them whatever I give them, and I take whatever I take, and I don't care. I'm going to give you some good in the end, but I'm going to do it in a way that I want to do it when I want to do it. And for Yusuf, he thinks it's a long time. But the time between his worst year and his best year is literally only 2 minutes of screen time. But in his calculation of time, it was years. I'm doing it the way I want to do it for reasons. Some of them he may understand, some of them he may never understand, and I don't care. You know what I'm saying? I'm telling a story. It's really, mashallah, it further subjugated me to the reality of God. You know what I'm saying? And how far, even saying far is a wrong word, because it's like how transcendent Allah is. Not just how much bigger than me or like better or stronger. Subhanaka. Just beyond. You know what I'm saying? Yes. Totally. I can't, there is no, mashallah. Like you hear me
no comparison.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Because now I'm through thinking about film and thinking about these characters in a relationship with me, it just increased my awe of God. You know what I'm saying? Yes.
Yeah, you reminded me of two ayahs which have to do with vision, actually, and perception. One is "Laysa kamithlihi shay'an wa huwa as-sami' al-basir," and it's really ajib because nothing is like him. Nothing is like unto him, and he is the seeing and the hearing, which is really deep because a lot of things see and a lot of things hear, right? Not only just humans, but bats and whales and, squirrels, you know what I mean? They see and hear in their own way. So it's almost like, why would he use those names when he could use names that really no one else does? Right. But that's a profound teaching, is that when we say God sees and God hears, there's almost no similarity. There is some, because it's symbolic, but it's of a whole other order. Right. And then the other profound verse is, vision perceives him not, but he perceives all vision.
Right.
Which is so deep, which is like an author, a writer.
Exactly.
Like, no one in the story can see the one writing them, but he sees all of their perspective.
And that's the point. Because sometimes that verse or verses like it in any of the traditions, it's like there's a God that's seeing everyone.
Right.
That's part of it.
Yes.
But God is the seeing. He's the only one that's actually seeing. So when Yusuf lays his eyes on something, Yusuf looks at a dollar on the ground. I'm looking at the dollar. No. I'm making is his eyes that I'm using to tell a story. He only sees what I want him to see. You know what I'm saying? And that's a amazing thing about writing.
You wrote the dollar and you wrote the street, right. and really it is you that wrote it. The dollar doesn't exist except as in you. You know what I mean?
And so that seeing the dollar, what is being seen, and the seeing itself, I'm the seeing. I'm the seeing. Not just I can see Yusuf and I can see all the characters. I'm saying the sight that he's using is not his sight. It's not generated from his own faculties. He doesn't even exist. Where is Yusuf? Where is he? Where is Yusuf? Where is he? He just exists in my mind. He only exists in my mind. You know what I'm saying? And so you would have to say, Subhanallah, Subhanallah wa Allahu Akbar. You know what I'm saying? Because Allah is, yeah, he's the only one seeing. He's the only one hearing. You know what I'm saying?
And this relates
Yeah, no, go ahead, bismillah.
No, this relates interestingly to, so fanafila, annihilation in God. And you have this whole tradition in the Sufi tradition of what's called the shatiyat, which are these mystical utterances where people speak in the divine first person. And what's interestingly enough is the exemplar of that is the Prophet ﷺ himself, because you have the hadith Qudsi. When the Prophet, they're not Quran, they're hadith, but the Prophet is speaking in the first person, right? I am the treasure that love to be known. My servant draws near to me, et cetera, until I love him. And when I love him, I become the eye with which you see, the ear with which you, right? So that's a specific one. But, you know, you have Halaj by Yazid Bistami. You have this whole tradition of mystical utterances, Ana al-Haq, Subhani, glory to me, because, and the later Sufi tradition, even those that were more more conservative, they always said, they defended them because they said, like, they're not speaking from their self. They're speaking from absence of self. They actually tapped in, you could say, to once that self is gone, it is just the author of all selves that they are experiencing in the first person. And again, go ahead. And it's hard to even speak about these things from a point of duality. If you're not, that's why, it's all about taste and experiential knowledge. It's not theoretical. But I was also thinking, you know, on the Sufi path, they also talk about fanafi Rasulullah, fanafi Sheikh, that like you actually on the stages to annihilation and the ultimate reality, there is like an annihilation in the exemplar, right? Your living spiritual master, and then the master of all spiritual masters, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so that once you pattern yourself on the protagonist so much, and that's why the sunnah is so profound. It's not just like, oh, we put this foot and we say that. It's like that. There is a metaphysical depth that you actually lose your self-identity in the personage of the exemplar. Which is deep about like which is what's happening when you watch a movie. Like you become Neo. It's not just like, oh, I'm watching Neo. Why is this? Because it actually transforms you, a child who's listening to a story, and then that becomes your pattern. I want to be courageous. I know the bullies are trying to beat me up on the way to school, but I'm Luke Skywalker. I'm Neo. I'm Jesus. I'm the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I'm going to act in a way upon the exemplar. And you do so until that is who you are.
That is who you are. You become the president, and that is the fanat. That is that you know, it's a trip because there's a movie, man. You should watch this movie under the context of what we're talking about. I mean, have you ever seen Adaptation?
No.
It's a Kaufman film. Man, this will blow your wig back. I'm gonna go watch it again. I've watched it several times, but it's Andy Kaufman, who's a writer in real life, writing like himself, writing a story where he's in it, and the character in it is writing. Anyway, you see this interplay between, even though it's not like a spiritual movie, but it's just a beautiful demonstration of this point where the character inside the illusory realm becomes conscious of the writer. You know, there's another movie called The Big Short, who's the same directors as who did Vice, the Dick Cheney movie that's out in the theaters now. It's called The Big Short. It's about the financial crisis in 2008. Steve Carell, Brad Pitt, and Ryan Gosling, whatever. But you remember there were points where they would explain to the audience, there'd be like this weird cutaway, and there'd be this, you know, girl sitting in a hot tub explaining what a short sale is or something like that. You know what I'm saying? Because that is, or they talk about like breaking the fourth wall. But this is kind of different. Instead of breaking the fourth wall, it's like breaking the first wall. So breaking the fourth wall, for people who don't know, you know, like when you're watching theater, there's like an imaginary wall between the audience and the people on stage, and the people are acting in it. And we understand that we can see them, but they can't see us. They kind of pretend like we're not there. You know what I'm saying? That's the fourth wall. But then when they turn to talk to us, so like in House of Cards, a lot of theater they use this, but like in House of Cards, there's a moment where Frank Underwood will turn to the audience and speak directly to the audience, meaning you're seeing me, but I can also see you. And that's a particular storytelling device, right? But rarely is it breaking the first wall. I'm making this terminology up right now. I mean, but a first wall is not the wall that faces the audience, but breaking the wall that faces the writer. Where, for example, if we were in a story about Baraka Blue and Amir Sulaiman having a podcast, and then I start saying to the writer, why did you have me do this podcast right now? You know what I'm saying? Or I'm engaging the one. This is what dua. This is engaging the author. The angels asking, will you create the humans and people that will spread mischief and shed blood on the earth while we're worshiping you? They're engaged. They're breaking the first wall. They're engaging the author of the narrative. You know what I'm saying? And that's what Salat is breaking the first wall. I'm going to engage directly with the author, and even not of the people of the great saints who speak in this ecstatic speech, but even when I say, when reciting the Quran, you know what I'm saying? And I say, La ilaha illa anta, or La ilaha illallah, or La ilaha illa anta, or La ilaha illa anna, you know what I'm saying? Just to recite the book, God is forcing me to recite the book properly. Out of modesty or shyness, I can't change that ayah. I can't change that verse of Quran to make it fit my modesty. I have to say, I am God. I have to say those words off of my tongue, although it is Allah Ta'ala speak. And this is like an exercise in breaking the first wall, so to speak. I just made that just now. But breaking the first wall. So I'm going to seek to embody the writer, the creator of the narrative, until he becomes the eye by which he sees with, you know what I'm saying? I become that, or he becomes the eye by which I see with, the ear by which I hear with, the hand by which I strike with, the foot by which I walk with, So it's like, that is what religion is doing. The ritual is to habitually break us out of the illusion, engage us back with the author, and then send us back into the illusion realm to manifest the story, And yeah, mashallah, it is. Because when Neo is afraid, we become afraid. When Neo is happy, we become happy. When Neo falls in love, we fall in love. Because we become him, you know what I'm saying? Or he becomes us, you know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Yeah, and I was thinking about the fact that like some of our, even in our age, right? I know, alhamdulillah, you and I have like teachers who are great sages, great, Sufi masters. And what's interesting is we live in an age of great upheaval. Some of them, even their own countries are being destroyed and, in deep suffering and deep oppression and being bombed by other countries or have their own corrupt governments, etc. And I think you and I have talked about this, but what's deep about their engagement with the present moment and how they proceed. And we kind of, I always contrast it with like kind of some of the young, like activist type people who are just like so, outraged and pointing the blame and looking for the guilty party in the world. But you see some of the great teachers, and they are, even though maybe suffering and seeing their people suffering deeply, and they're not apathetic at all. They're doing everything in their power to rectify the situation, but also they're seeing it as the archetypes are playing out, that they're actually living in the story of the prophetic teachings. So they're saying like in every age, there's going to be a Pharaoh and there's going to be a Moses. And all we're trying to do is get people on the side of Moses, and we're trying to call people to reality. And we know that if the storyteller wrote Moses to do the Pharaoh of our age to do these things, this is the storyteller's story. Right. We are in it, and all we have to do is do our best to act with wisdom and with intention and the greatest grace possible amongst whatever the storyteller is writing for us. And also we have to have edeb with the storyteller. We love the storyteller, and we trust the storyteller, and we have absolute certainty in the storyteller. And so,
And we also see the they also see the characters with a level of compassion, because it's like you chose this, but also this is what's written for you.
Right.
And you're a fool, because this is just a little part of the story. The greater part of the story happens after this chapter closes. You know what I mean? And what you're doing now is of great harm to your own reality, your own story forever and ever. And so that's why, man, the stories that we live in, the stories that we believe in, the story that we tell ourselves about reality is of utmost consequences. Ideas have meanings. Ideas have consequences, as Dr. Omar always says. Ideas have consequences, and that the person next to you or the people in your own home, they could be living in a totally different narrative, and they're not experiencing the same thing at all.
Right.
That's the other piece of this, is that in the amalu biniyat, actions are by intentions. And this again is a teaching across, so that outwardly two people might do the exact same thing, but that inwardly their reality is totally different because of their intentions. So there's always this story unseen that's the real story. Exactly.
And then really intention is it's a consequence of story, you know? Like if I'm doing some good act because of the narrative, and sometimes when I say narrative or story, like, you know, obviously in this conversation, the way we're meaning it, but sometimes it's like people think of it as fictional, like you said at the beginning, where I can say, well, my story is the narrative that I'm giving this money to this poor person is that Allah likes it. Allah likes the grateful, the generous. He rewards the generous. Blah 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 blah. Like that's my story. Not that it's false. I'm saying the word story, and sometimes I don't like to use the word myth, story, narrative. Is kind of like kind of a machination of the ego, you know. But that's not what I mean. We're like, of course, in the context of what we're using, meaning more real than these atoms and whatnot. You know what I'm saying? And that's the story. I mean, even if we deal with atoms, you know, once we really get into it, the atoms are going to take the form of the story that you have. You know, and the story of your consciousness. That's what how atoms are gonna behave. You know what I mean? Yeah, mashallah. Like, I don't know anything more. It is the deepest and the most pervasive, and like, it's a type of epiphany that makes me, and this is my favorite type of epiphany, that makes me go back and like relearn everything I've learned about everything, about love, about God, about religion, about the day of standing, about prophethood, about everything. It further illuminates things that I already believed and I thought I understood to a degree. But it's just, I'm saying, it's for writing this movie. I was like, oh, like when you were saying those mentions, those ayats of Quran, that's what I'm like, it's like, oh, right. Oh, so something that's like saying subhanallah. Like when I'm subhanallah. Oh, right, got it. You know what I'm saying? And it makes it more immediately accessible. You know what I'm saying? As opposed to theoretical. I'm like, what is my relationship to Yusuf? And by way of that, the character in my book, the character in my story, by way of that, all of these things light up and they become immediately accessible. As some things, you know, as you know, sometimes we take things from our teachers and in a moment we have it, and then we it's like trying to remember a dream. And I was like, oh man, you know, you can remember the words of what was said, or you have the notes, but you can't really access the reality like you did at that moment, you know? But by the function of story, the frame of storytelling, it's like I can immediately access it all the time, and I can immediately articulate it, you know? Because when I talk to someone, a person could be an agnostic or some other tradition or whatever, but when I talk about my relationship with Yusuf in my story, it's immediately accessible, you know? So when I can find something that's easily accessible for me so I can access it at a moment's notice, or that I can find something I can articulate, something that's very slippery, very abstract, very hard to hold. Even if you get it for a second and then you lose it and you get it for a moment, if I can find something, I can put it in someone's hand, like, you have this now. And anytime you want it, you can look at it. You know what I mean?
Right.
Allahu Akbar. That's a big blessing from Allah Ta'ala.
That's profound. And when you said that, it reminded me of just like in movies where you have that epiphany point, you have that grand reveal, right? Like I thought of The Usual Suspects. Like you watch the end, it sets off this chain reaction of everything that happened before it, and you're like, oh. And then if you watch that movie again from the beginning, knowing that, you're seeing a totally different movie. And that's likewise with the people. I love what you said about epiphany, and I think this gets into like ma'rifah, experiential knowledge. That and I was reading this book by Michael Pollan, and it's called How to Change Your Mind. It's a super good book. It's actually all about the science of psychedelics. But one thing that he said about it is that he says in the psychedelic experience, there's a noetic quality. So the word noetic was interesting to me, but what he means is like when you know, there's like the kind of stereotype of like the hippie, right? Who's just like drops acid and then he's like, we're all one. We all just need to love each other. And then it's like, you're just like, all right, dude, whatever. I got to get to work. You know what I mean? Like this freaking hippie, right? But what he said is deep about it. He says, the noetic quality is the level at which you experience and experientially realize things. Because he's talking about, for instance, the science of people using psychedelics to kick drug addiction, for instance, or smoking cigarettes. Let's use that. People know I have this habit. It's harmful for me. I shouldn't be doing it. But why don't they actually change? But he's saying that in that experience, you have such a profound level of experiencing the harm or the pattern or whatever that it can change you in a single experience. And you know, likewise, when you just, you know, learn the teachings, like it's all one, we should love each other, that doesn't necessarily sink in. That, you know, a lot of people who are believers in that look at how they behave and look at the harm they do to others. Right. And that's why, like, we could hear like the noetic quality, to use it like, you know, in our story, you heard a specific verse or a specific hadith or a specific teaching of your sheikh many times, 100 times, 1,000 times, and you understood it on a specific level, but then once it hits you, right? It just hits you to your core, and it actually causes epiphany and this opening, and you can never, it affects the way you see the whole thing and yourself and everything. And so, like, you know, and I think that's the depth too of like spiritual practice is supposed to do something to us. It's supposed to carve something in us out so that we can more deeply experience these transformative vantage points that actually change our, you know, and that's that hadith. I was a hidden treasure, or you know, you draw near to me until I love you, and then I become the eye with which you see, the ear with which you hear. In one narration, the tongue with which you speak. So, yeah, man, like this noetic quality, and that's also in a movie, which is like in a good story, you actually suspend yourself. You forget about yourself. It's a story that's not well told. It's like, yeah, whatever, okay, you know, like when it's really good, it's so gripping that you kind of fade away. And on this deep level, you're experiencing the scene and the one seeing and the different perspectives and experiences.
Yeah, mashallah. Yeah, and it's a practice that you can easily have. And if you do it with the right intention, like if you know what you're experiencing, you name it, the way we're naming it right now, it's like, yeah, that can be a gateway. So I love going to the movies. I go to the movies, quote unquote, religiously, you know, to have that experience, for time, to have that type of relationship with time, to have that type of relationship with selfhood, you know, and a vanishing of self, you know, to watch someone else's imagination. So I'm watching this movie and I'm in Christopher Nolan's consciousness. That's really what's happening. I'm inside his consciousness, you know what I mean? So like when I'm watching Inception, I'm going inside of Christopher Nolan's consciousness, where these characters are going into other people's consciousnesses and they're going to other people. Like, you know, that's really what's happening. I'm in his mind, you know what I'm saying? And his heart and his worldview and his narrative and his story, you know? And so, yeah, I like to go to the movie. Matter of fact, after we get off of here, I'm gonna pray Margaret to go to the movie. You know what I'm saying? Tonight. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's become an actual tool of deep, profound spiritual awakening. You know, it's not exaggeration. I know maybe it sounds crazy to some people, but it's the truth. It is a great means of, even if the movie is not great, even if the movie isn't about something good.
Yeah.
It's not even so much about the subject of the movie, but the skill of the storytelling, you know, and you'll have, you know, there's a TV show. I don't even watch this show just because it's repulsive to me, but there's a TV show on Fox, I think it is, or, you know, one of those general stations, common stations, not some special network, you know, called Lucifer. And Lucifer is the protagonist. And you're identifying with Lucifer. And you're identifying with what he wants and how he ended up where he got to. And he's misunderstood. And like, I don't even engage that narrative because I know the power of narrative. Like, I'm not trying to live in Luciferian consciousness. I'm not trying to lose my selfhood to engage Luciferian freaking selfhood. I'm not interested, you know? But you can tell the story of anyone, you know, no matter how wicked or how harmful or how, not even to make a judgment about good or bad, but no matter how distant someone is from me, whether this person is a little green creature that lives on a freaking planet so many thousands of years ago in a galaxy far, far away. But if the story is written well, I'm this little green Sufi monk warrior from thousands of years ago, many, you know, light years away or whatever. But you know, it's a type of magic, man. It's a real type of magic that some people can wield for good or for harm, you know, to benefit or to harm people. You know?
MashaAllah. Yeah, and I mean, alhamdulillah, there's a few things I think we should close. I mean, we could go on and on like this, and it's beautiful. But I think one of the things too that you reminded me of, and when you said like going to watch a movie as a spiritual practice, and like to me, it doesn't strike me as odd at all because I know you and I know that. But also just generally, like for me, it's like, and for you, I know like writing. You know, people see you as like a poet and look at the great words that come out of you and mashallah. But, you know, because I know you and we've got to, you know, spend time together, I know that your poetic output and by extension, your, you know, movie writing output is directly related to how you see the world and how the world occurs to you and your, you know, the lens through which you see, the eye through which you see. And, you know, I noticed like just in general conversation, you have a great skill at actually just bringing up analogy. Like, mashallah, like you see things through narrative. Like, for instance, whatever we're talking about, difficulty in life and struggles and how it can make you stronger. And you just like immediately we're like, it's like a push-up. You don't, you know, like the ground is gravity. Those things are beneficial because those are what allows you to have resistance. And like, you know what I mean? Just using very like embodied, tangible examples. And so I'm curious on one level, like, because for me, I see, and this is what I'm trying to do in these like online poetry courses and just ones that I teach in person as well, is that, and I know because I know also what you do and what you teach when you teach writing is that it's primarily about seeing. It's very secondarily about what you actually write. And it's primarily about how you see. And then the writing will come, right? Which is really deep. And you know, so I wonder what you have to say about that. And then the hadith came to mind also that the Prophet ﷺ said, "This world and everything within it is cursed except for dhikr Allah, remembrance of God, and that which helps you to remember God." which is so deep, because the other way to, like, you can reword that, nothing in this world is cursed if it causes you to remember God, or if it's a remembrance of God for you, which also gets to the like intention. And for two people having the same experience, it could have a totally different reality. And it's based on their vantage point.
Exactly. And that's why I so much want to encourage people. And I'm coming more and more. I know you've been encouraging me with this, to doing like a workshop or a class on story in this way, because people just consume an incredible amount of story already. Yeah. And so I would love for them to benefit from it. You know what I'm saying? Because there's no stopping people from the shows. Frankly, they're just too good. Like, they're just too well written. That the skill level at which people are writing is damn near at magic levels. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, they've developed the technology. When I say technology, I don't mean special effects and all that stuff. I mean just years and years of refining storytelling. We've got to a point of storytelling that's absolutely enthralling, that can engage a person for 3, 4, 5 hours at a time. If they have the time, like if they don't have to work, if it's the weekend or whatever, there's people that will watch, you know, start a show, a season, and finish the season on the weekend. Just finish the season. You know what I'm saying? That's 10 hours. People can't work out for 10 hours. People don't work on their entrepreneurial business for 10 hours. People don't, you know, there's a lot of things that won't do for 10 hours. People do it voluntarily, not getting paid. In fact, they would pay for it. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, the point is that I would love to at least express what I've learned from story, so that they engage story in remembrance of God. You know what I'm saying? That it reminds them of the reality by watching the imaginary to engage the reality. You know what I'm saying? Maybe that's the name of the workshop. Engaging the reality by the imaginary. Huh? That sounds very
beautiful. And yeah, man, I mean, and I think, alhamdulillah, that's one of the main reasons, you know, we called the organization that I founded Rumi Center for Spirituality and the Arts, because Rumi embodies in one person the spiritual master and the artist. And also what's deep about him is that he made a decision implicitly. At one point early in his career, he was a teacher. He was teaching law, teaching theology, teaching all these things. And then at one point he made a decision or a realization. He had an epiphany, as he stated it. And from that point on, he decided that he wasn't going to write like not even theological or kind of legal treatise, but even he wasn't going to write a kind of spiritual manual on the path. But that the best way to guide people, to guide his disciples, was through art. So he was just going to make art. You know what I mean? He was going to write poems and tell narrative. And in fact, I can't wait for you to get into this book about the polished mirror, because in that essay on Rumi, he talks about that Rumi has seven voices throughout the Mesnevi, like 7 perspectives. Like there's the narrator, then there's the person in the narration, then there's this, like all these perspectives are at work, which is deep. So yeah, man, I really believe, and especially in our time, in which people, religion is such a difficult category for a lot of people. And it's just, you know, art is such a profound tool. And also because of the story of modernity, you know, people don't want to hear about religion, but they do want to imbibe meaning. And how do they do it? It's through art. It's through movies. It's through music, right? People talk about having a religious experience at a concert. It's through going to, right? They go to the museum and they like, in the same way that people would have gone to a monastery or gone to a church to worship, they go to stare at this, to try to edify their lives or get meaning or draw something out or to converse about these, you know what I mean? So I think we occupy a really important place, and that, you know, these are profound tools. And I agree. The Muslim community is really so far missed this, like all these conferences, etc. And you think, you know, and there may be great speakers, say that all of them are amazing, right? You have 50 people speaking to you in this one, but it's like, we've really failed to understand human consciousness and subjectivity and psychology if we don't understand that to have like an entertainment section with one or two people, as opposed to like centering narrative and art and like empowering the true storytellers, not just like, oh, well, we can get anyone to just entertain, like to take a break from people lecturing. Like, no.
Exactly. And that's what it is. It's like to take a break from the serious matters.
Yes.
We're going to relieve you with some entertainment, you know what I mean? And then we're going to get back to the serious matters. But yeah, when it comes to retention of the virtues, retention of the teachings, hands down, cross-culturally, cross-religious traditions, storytelling is the means by which, is the frame by which that these virtues are retained, man. You know, that's how it goes, man.
Alhamdulillah, bro. I appreciate your time. You want to just let people know who are listening where they can find your work or what you're working on now, or the best place to just, you know, follow your output?
Yeah, so, you know, you can find me across the social networks, just by my first and last name, Amir Sulaiman, AmirSulaiman. We just released the pilot sizzle for a show that, again, it's not about narrative, but it's called Cornerstone Folklore, where we're going to different parts of the world and looking at those places through the lens of their poetic traditions. And our pilot episode is in Iran. It's dope. You can look that up, Cornerstone Folklore, on YouTube. True and Living Media is my production company, and so that's the company that I shot, that we created that. So you can look up trueandlivingmedia.com. And you can check for me at the Rumi Center, even though Blue and I haven't settled exactly how or when we're going to do it. But I'm going to do a workshop called The Universe is a Poem, which is actually related to what we're talking about. But also I want to do a workshop specifically on storytelling, and even more specifically on film. So view films, talk about films, view films, and draw out some of the meaning of some of these things we're talking about. The more I'm thinking about, more I'm inclined to it. It's always been such a very peculiar thing that I've just nerded out on. And so it's always been something that I don't hear other people talk about in this kind of way. So I'm like, I don't want to even be interested in this type of thing. But the more I do talk about it, the more I realize how important it is. And even if other people aren't talking about it, some more reason to, you know, to make it part of our collective discourse. So we'll see, but we're going to do that soon, inshallah, February, inshallah.
Inshallah, binillah. All right, bro. I appreciate you, man.
All right, man. Love you, man.
Love you too.